I'm Evan, and this is Globalization and Infectious Diseases. The Black Death of 1347, the smallpox virus of 1870, Spanish flu of 1818, some of the deadliest pandemics throughout history known to humans, swept through continents throughout the world, killing millions of people in times when trade and travel throughout the world were not as easy to do as they were today. It would seem impossible to contain and eradicate infectious diseases in the globalized world that we live in the 21st century. Arthur E. Appleton, a professor of international law at the Johns Hopkins University, believes that the nationalist approach to dealing with pandemics falls short of effectively managing a pandemic. Instead, the world will need to turn to a global approach entailing cooperation between two countries and continents. Chad Bone et al. Supports Appleton when they write, "Epidemics anywhere threaten immunization efforts everywhere because there are always new and improved strains arising somewhere in the world. In short, solving pandemics domestically is a temporary fix." So the question arises, how should the US handle globalization to help prevent another global pandemic? One could look at this conflict and see a chance for society to adapt to an ever-evolving issue, infectious disease. In Urban Evolution, How Species Adapt to Survive in Cities, Eric Bender writes that evolutionary ecologists question whether plants and animals evolve differently in low versus high-income neighborhoods. Building on this, Appleton and Bone et al. Argue that wealthier countries can adapt better in a pandemic due to access to resources. Ironically, however, nationalization is a false means of hope, a false means of protection in our global world. The journal, in their own words, Resilience Among Haitian Survivors of the 2010 Earthquake, Bristol et al. Cite journalist Montauk's definition of resilience as acceptance of conditions, as solidarity demonstrated, as Haitians helping Haitians. Javier Solana discusses the low resilience of the global supply chains and weaknesses in the global trade, pointing toward the need for a better globalization in the article, A Better Globalization, with a similar philosophy of not exercising nationalism. Although globalization may in part be a catalyst of a global pandemic, an individual may take a localized approach to solve the issues. A pandemic can only be solved via global cooperation because nations need each other to pool resources, research, cooperation, and because it will facilitate the adoption of uniform laws to allow one governing body to make critical decisions. To begin with, wealthy countries are at an advantage when it comes to global pandemics. Bone et al. Suggests that in order to protect a country's own citizens, rich countries must invest to scale up global vaccine production and distribution capacity that can respond flexibly to emerging threats. The essence of this argument is that wealthier countries have the ability to economically support global vaccine production in times when there is no crisis, so that when vaccines are needed, the world is prepared. The limitation is that wealthier countries compound the problem by hoarding vaccines manufactured at home. The WHO advocates for working together to build a more robust international health architecture. Although the WHO is reputable, they have a vested interest in this issue because a suggestion by them that battling pandemics is not a global issue would be claiming, in other words, that their organization is unnecessary. The WHO believes that a positive consequence of creating a global response is building an infrastructure that will prepare the world better for future pandemics. In addition to wealthy countries having an advantage focusing on the pandemic in one's own country will not eliminate the threat domestically and certainly not globally. Bone et al. Claims epidemics anywhere threaten immunization efforts everywhere, not because of new viral variants, but because of an increasing risk of viral mutations. That creates uncertainty and blunts consumption, investment, and ultimately growth. Scientifically speaking, control of a pathogen cannot be isolated domestically without cooperation and control. The pathogen will continue to be transported around the world and will continue to mutate, making eradication impossible. Additionally, Bone et al. States a larger pool of infected people in countries where the pandemic remains uncontrolled provides a larger laboratory for viral variants vying for genetic dominance. These sources would agree that limitations include mistrust of scientific experts due to differing political views, along with the lack of education in this area, which contributes to the mistrust, while a strength of this solution is that scientifically simultaneous worldwide eradication is feasible if countries cooperate with one another, do not view themselves as islands. One alternative to global cooperation is dealing with pandemics on a national level like Taiwan did recently. Yu-Ji Chen and Jerome A. Cohen, both Council on Foreign Relations experts, states Taiwan adopted vigorous measures for screening, testing, contact tracing, and enforcing quarantines. Meanwhile, the WHO minimized the threat. Taiwan only had 380 cases and 5 deaths due to COVID-19 by April 9th, 2020, a stunningly low number for a population of 23.6 million. Chen and Cohen's point is that pandemics can be dealt with on the national level in rare cases like Taiwan. Next, economic cooperation amongst the world is the only way to prevent another global pandemic. Using a country's own resources to protect itself is a natural reaction to a serious threat. Resource sharing and abiding by international law are the only way to eradicate such threats. A better globalization states that shared governance will allow overarching threats to be effectively confronted. Countries acting alone cannot be a substitute for effective multilateralism. Ironically, it is globalization that has led us to the spread of infectious disease, but by taking a more comprehensive approach to globalization and essentially making the world more cohesive, we can fight these threats more effectively. Education about global interdependence is key to addressing resistance to it, for an understanding that scientifically working as a global unit is necessary to stop the spread of disease. Appleton states that resistance to globalism is a form of anti-intellectualism, and a lack of understanding leads in other words, a lack of understanding leads some to believe that nationalism is a viable solution to solving global pandemics, specifically economic inequality and control of infectious diseases. Though countries may take a global approach, though countries may take a localized approach to handling and preventing pandemics, a pandemic cannot be solved without global collaboration, allowing for pooling of resources, including research and development, as well as economic cooperation by promoting the adoption of uniform laws to allow one governing body to make critical decisions and require the world to abide by the same laws.
Okay. Evan, what information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate?
So there was a lot out there about what effect globalization would have on pandemics and world affairs, but not a whole lot on what a localized approach would do. So that was difficult to find, but there was some of that evidence like Taiwan, but not a whole lot of it.
And how did you use the conclusions or questions of others to advance your own research?
To advance my own research, I looked at the views of different countries like the United States and maybe third world countries that aren't as wealthy, and I synthesized their viewpoints to come to a conclusion, which in short term, globalization would economically benefit smaller countries, but long term it benefits everyone.
Okay. Thank you.